obviously I follow the business. I followed your kind of career trajectory for a long time. I think what you're doing is really interesting. But for everyone who's reading this and kind of seeing this for the first time, maybe just walk through a quick background of what your product does, the problem that you're solving, and I think the sideline into that is kind of how you sell your product into the enterprise.
Yeah, definitely. So great to be here. Yeah, so I'm Matt, co-founder, CEO of Poggio. In short, what we do is we help enterprise revenue teams identify customers that need their solution. And so if you think about enterprise sales teams, especially large scaled ones where there's a number of different solutions they're selling and these solutions are constantly changing, either because the market changes and you have to sort of kind of restructure how you're talking about value, or you make an acquisition or you launch a new product. There's a lot of different value props that your sellers need to be able to convey to a customer. You also have a lot of people touching that customer. So you may have overlay teams and different things like that. And so you could have one, two, three, five, 10 different people that are all touching a customer. And what we basically do is we help drive a process around identifying the challenges at a given customer, sort of always up to date, in depth, and then helping you to match the right solution so that you can show up with a really strong and compelling value prop to the right person to hopefully sell one or more of your different solutions. And we sort of talk about this as a point of view. This kind of manifests in different kind of sales documentation, different artifacts, three whys, all sorts of different things that sellers are instructed to do for a large number of reasons are unable to do at scale. And so we
Right.
help what we think of as just drive process around best practices around points of view.
You sell the product right now.
Yeah, so we work with sales leadership, so CROs, SVPs of sales and RevOps teams who have a desire to ultimately drive process around how do we want to repeatably essentially bring our value narrative to the market. And again, when you've got 5, 10, 20 different value narratives that are all going to be attached to different customer problems, that becomes, just from a multiplication point of view, really, really hard. The other piece of that is the moment you go and you build one of these points of view, it's sort of immediately out of date, especially with
Mhm.
the way that the world works today. And so for us, we sort of partner with these large revenue teams who have a desire to drive this sort of process standardization ultimately. And then we work with them to scale that process across any number of accounts. And so what we actually, maybe this is jumping a little bit ahead, but we actually charge per account that you can almost think of it as monitoring with Poggio. And so what
Huh.
we say is, where do you want to start? Is it North America strategic, North America enterprise, and then you want to move to EMEA or APAC or whatever it is? And so we think of this as sort of almost account coverage. So then based on sort of the depth of the point of view that you want to build and how frequently you want it to refresh, we calculate a charge ultimately based on the value that you're going to derive from that account. And then we don't charge for seats, because if you've got 20 people touching the account, we want all 20 of those people to have really good intelligence and be aligned to a single value narrative. We don't want you to have to think, well, I want my account executive to understand the customer, but I'm okay that my BDR and my SDR and my post-sales person and my marketing team have a totally different value narrative that they've kind of gone off and crafted
Yeah.
on their own.
Did you start that way on pricing, or is that like an evolved way of thinking of where you are now?
Yeah, so it's been an evolution, as you probably hear from a lot of folks, is continuously evolving as sort of technology changes, and as what we see our customers wanting to do is starting to change, which is there's value of, if you think of this on a one-to-one perspective, I'm a seller. I think like Salesforce is a good example. Say I'm a Salesforce seller. There's like 20 different things I can talk about. MuleSoft, soon to be Informatica, Sales Cloud, Service, like Agentforce, endless amount of things. And if I'm going to go try to sell to Target or Walmart, how do I figure out what's going on at Target or Walmart across all the different people and all the different problems that any one of those 20
Okay.
solutions can solve? So on a one-to-one basis, there's a lot of value. Where it starts to get really interesting, though, we think, and where we actually ultimately want to go, is you actually want to build this system that you continuously understand where you're relevant for your customer. And so for us, there was kind of a couple pieces there where early on we had started with seats because it's easier to understand and people
Yeah.
wanted predictability and all of that stuff. And what we sort of found, though, is then you'd have people that were like, well, my AE is going to have access, but then I don't really know if I want my SDR to have access. And so for
Hmm.
us, we were like, whoa, like, no, like that. We want you to understand your customer, and we want the barrier to everyone understanding that customer to be really, really low. So let's go attach to essentially a price of the account. And then you can also say, well, the sort of LTV of this account is X, and thus I'm willing to pay Y. The other problem that this solves, it's sort of a really interesting thing, is where we sort of see the future going, is it's not just people touching these accounts. It's going to go into your existing systems, and it's going to be touched by an agent. And
Yeah.
so if you really sort of zoom out, the problem that we want to solve is as an enterprise or as a company, you have a really good and coherent value narrative that's always up to date for your customer. And you can use that across everything, even product development. If you say, hey, all of our customers are having this, we're going to launch this new solution and it's going to solve X, Y, and Z problems. If we launch this solution, where are we going to go talk to people about it? Where is our
Hmm.
value narrative strong, medium, low? And then let's go make sure we know that. And so we can then sort of scale it with account-based pricing in a way that the seat-based pricing, especially when you start to talk about agents accessing it, just kind of
Yes.
doesn't really
Yes.
make sense.
And it also a bit spirals out of control, I think, on like cost.
Right.
The cost sprawl on
Right.
that on the agent side
Right.
gets pretty wild. So
Right.
obviously really fascinating going from kind of seats to kind of thinking about this like coverage based model.
Yeah.
When you were building this and kind of thinking about kind of this product, two questions. Who were the kind of initial customers or design partners that you were talking to kind of inform that, hey, there's a problem here
Yeah.
and it's like a really burning and pressing problem? And also,
Yeah.
I think from your founder point of view, that you think this is where the world's going to go. So maybe that's one point,
Yeah.
one question. The other question is, if you didn't exist right now, what's the alternative? And how good is the alternative for
Yeah.
them to kind of just be successful inside the enterprise?
Yeah. So the latter question we'll get to because that's a great one. The interesting thing about our kind of journey is it actually started with a little bit of a hypothesis of could you get and by the way, this is sort of over 2 years ago now that we were first starting to build this product. And we said we sort of had this light bulb moment of, LLMs are really powerful. We've been kind of playing around with them. And, could you get an LLM to do parts of a salesperson's job? And at the time, we were actually thinking like a junior salesperson's job, basic
Mm.
research, like all that kind of stuff. And so our initial way that we sold the product was well, at first we actually didn't sell it. We just gave it to enterprise salespeople because we had this question of like, can you actually provide value? And what we found is the answer was sort of yes to a degree that was a little bit shocking, candidly. And so we had all these enterprise sellers at all these really good like kind of leading software franchises, tend to be the early adopters or the kind of,
Yeah.
software companies. And so we kind of had all these people that were using it and loved it. And we are like, oh, whoa, like this is great. And so then we kind of had this kind of crossroads moment, which was, well, do we start charging those sellers to use it or, or not? Or like who is ultimately going to realize the most value? And this sort of has kicked off a journey that continues to evolve. But for us, we really think about this as a process standardization play. And if you just give things to your sellers and hope that they go figure out how to
Yeah.
apply your value framework, it's not going to work, right? This is the reason that you force people into your CRM to drive process adherence. Because if you're a CRO and you've got 1,000 people, your job is process definition and process management, like period. And and this actually kind of gets into a little bit of the second part of your question of like, if you don't have something like us, can your reps go to ChatGPT? Can they go to Gemini? Sure. Can they get back good information? Absolutely. Great products. Are they going to be doing things aligned to your value framework? Probably not. Are they going to be able to update themselves to your updated value framework? Are they going to
Mhm.
be able to start selling this new product that has a new value prop? Probably not. And so what we sort of find is that the ultimate value, and this also gets a lot into vision, is really starting to think about this really intelligent enterprise where I actually think it's sort of funny. The easiest way to think about this is like, what if your CRM had like a brain and your CRM actually knew what your customers' problems were and how your potential solutions could solve them.
Mhm.
And we also sync to the CRM. So your CRM with Poggio can have a brain. And that kind of gets back to it for us, which also is when we first started, the first version of the product, we've got this great UI and sellers love it and that's great. We sort of think the world is kind of moving to this place that like, yes, you can use the UI and you can go there and that's where you configure the agents and all of that stuff. That is one of many ways to access the information. We want that POV, again, getting back to pricing model, to be in all the different places that it's relevant and in whatever format it needs to be in that place. So it's
Yeah.
different in Slack. You can even hook it up to ChatGPT and
Yeah.
ChatGPT then has access to this point of view. You can pop it into Salesforce. For us, it's like if you're a CRO and a RevOps leader, you need this process document that's filled out and really good and
Yes.
always up to date. Let's just get it wherever we are. Not always in our UI. That's fine. We kind of feel the world's going post UI to some degree. And
Yeah.
those are all just going to start to look very, very different.
Founder that we were also interviewing for buyers and builders yesterday said something along the lines of that we're living in a post click 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 world, meaning
Yeah.
the way that we have a GUI and the way that we have a UI, you're no longer taking the mouse or the mouse pad and clicking on it, right? Because there's
Yeah.
all workflows that are there. Okay, so kind of as we kind of talk through pricing or origination of the product problem that you're going in, the customer, it sounds like the buyer who's buying this is generally the CRO or the kind of sales leadership that's there. How do you, and this is something I think we've learned from a few procurement large enterprise decision makers, is if you don't have a seat model and you have a coverage model and you're selling kind of a product that has multi surface areas, have
Mhm.
you run into kind of centralized buying groups inside the enterprise basically asking you, Matt, how do I like make sense of this? Because you just like what you're describing, and I agree with you. I think that's where the world's going. Like it doesn't fit the
Yeah.
standard kind of RFP, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
fit the standard pricing sheet that's there. So I'm curious if that's ever occurred in your discussions with enterprise
Yeah.
for the customers that you have.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. It's actually funny. The CRO is often not actually the buyer. They
Mm,
generally don't have budget. They rely on their RevOps leaders as sort of trusted partners to sort of implement and drive process. And so actually, judging by the question, it actually is a surprise for a lot of people. And I think didn't necessarily catch us by surprise, but the degree to which that's true was sort of a surprise. And so it's always great to have the CRO on your side. It's generally not sufficient because of the second part of your question, which is exclusively centralized buying committees. And they're sort of multidisciplinary. They're at some places it's sort of like an AI council. In some places it's sort of like especially larger enterprises has sort of like an IT team that's responsible for business apps and things like that, which right off the bat is if you're responsible for business apps, we kind of are, you're already like, well, we're not really a business app. We're kind of this
correct.
somewhere between an agent platform and a business app. And we actually think of ourselves sort of as an intelligence provider. Because
Yeah.
ultimately, and this is why we charge per account, is like ultimately the value is in this POV. It's in this point of view in this process document. And it's kind of this hard thing to sort of shove into your kind of brain's pricing models because it's kind of this concept and it sits there and it's floating there and it feeds your CRM and it feeds your rep and it's accessible in Slack. And if you hook it up to ChatGPT, through like MCP, you could say like, you're like, what is the POV for this account? Write me an email based on the
Yes.
POV for this account. And
Yes.
it could go reach into Poggio and bring that back.
Yeah.
And so what we've found is these sort of centralized groups have a lot of different people coming at it from a lot of different places. And ultimately are also thinking a lot about build versus buy today. And so that's kind of been an interesting part where different people on that committee have very different appetites for build versus buy and are coming at it from very different places around having kind of used the technology. And when I say just like LLMs in general. And so it's definitely an evolving space. And I think pricing is a piece of it, but it's also, and I don't think is unique to us by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's often just a lot harder to conceptualize the value that's being delivered as opposed to like I'm buying like kind of an interface and I can kind of see what it
Correct.
does and I can kind of
Correct.
understand that my people go in there, click there, and you can kind of draw this like fuzzy circle around that value and you kind of just know what you're going to get rather than, for us, it's sort of like, what if we just made your entire enterprise smarter and all those agents in the future that you're going to buy that need to be smart are going to point back to us. And in that way, we're
Yes.
almost this like foundational infrastructure, but you maybe don't have that many agents in production today. And by the way, we can help
Yes.
you figure out how to do that. But like it is predominantly mostly people today in these enterprises.
Yes. Yeah. How do you, maybe kind of tying it back to go to market a bit more, but how do you like
Yeah.
when you're selling this product kind of to the RevOps team and they're the kind of champion, what's required, from an integration onboarding standpoint? Like like where does your software sit? Does it sit kind of side by side the CRM? Does it sit downstream, upstream? Kind of one part of the question. The other part of the question is like, once you're live, how quickly, because so much what we're describing here, Matt, is talking about this
Yeah.
concept of the point of view and then
Yeah.
like putting a process around the point of views. How quickly can you show
Yeah.
value to the enterprise?
Yeah. So sort of interrelated questions. And the first question is, we can work as a fully standalone product because we can run using purely external information. We can figure out your value props from your website. They might not be
Hmm.
good as we've actually like learned where sometimes you'll kind of show up and kind of be able to demonstrate these POVs for people. And they're like, yeah, that's like not how we talk about the product. Like, where'd you get that from? And it's like, well, your website and your case studies. They're like, oh, we're rebranding. We don't talk like that anymore.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
we
Hmm.
can sort of start outside in, and then it's up to you to figure out sort of two things. One is like, how much additional internal information do you want to feed into Poggio to make these POVs better? So we start what we call sort of outside in, which is what is the kind of publicly available stuff, and then, third-party contact databases and all these sorts of things. And then you can start to layer in your internal stuff like your Salesforce data, or you can hook it up to your like HighSpot and Seismic to get your enablement docs to kind of supplement some of the outside in stuff that we see. So some of it is just kind of your level of
Hmm.
comfort and also where our buyer is coming from around their priorities. And what I mean by that is there's certain people that we talk to where they have this problem in their sort of sales or revenue teams where they're very sort of like internally focused on like, what if we sold the customer before? What are the existing conversations we're having? And then when they send us the RFP for the renewal for like, all this hardware that we can respond to the renewal. They want to be way more customer focused on like what's actually going on in this customer's business and how can we elevate ourselves to new stakeholders closer to the business, et cetera. And so
Hmm.
in those modes, you actually maybe want more of the outside in data. And because it's kind of a headache to get CRM integrated, like let's punt on that. We can do that, down the road. So some of it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure around what problem you're trying to solve. So that's kind of part one. Part two is kind of deployment depends on how much of that stuff you want to do. We always really, really recommend start by touching nothing because it makes everyone's life easier and you can get the gist of the product and you can get a ton of value. Once you start to learn how you want to use it, how you're going to want to have this thing evolve, how you're going to want to drive more process with it, that's when we can start to say, okay, hook it up to your CRM because you manage your sales team out of your CRM, obviously. And, well, I say obviously, but different, people do that to different degrees. But if you need that POV in the CRM, because every Monday you walk through all your
Yeah.
deals and you need that field, okay, like let's go hook up CRM. And then that becomes really, really value add. But if you're okay not looking at your CRM for that particular workflow, do we have to hook up the CRM like immediately post contract? Like it's
Yeah.
probably going to be better for you to use those calories just like making use of the product rather than going and banging your head against the wall trying to
Yeah.
explain to your
Yeah.
IT team that you need to hook up the CRM of all things.
Okay, I think it's an interesting framing, like using the calories, because I do think enterprise software pre AI was kind of built in this factory model that you line everything up, do the installation, do the onboarding, do the installation,
Yeah.
do the customer education, and it's basically all these little tweaks that you need to have. And here, what you're describing is like you've got single player mode. You need no integration really whatsoever. We can actually just pull the value from your existing
Yeah.
content online
Yeah.
and you'll see the value that's there. So I think that the
Yeah.
sales pitch there is just so structurally different than classic point solutions
Yeah.
of software that we've experienced before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the cool thing about it too is it sort of like aligns incentives early on, which is like we're not going to hook into all your stuff right away. I mean, I'd love to in the future because it can be a lot better. And obviously we get stickier the more we start to hook this stuff in. But if you use it for 6 months and if you come to me and you say, look, our sales teams are too internally focused, we need an outside in perspective on these customer challenges. Let's go solve that problem, go kind of prove it out over 6 months. And it's on us to make that happen. And if
Yeah.
you tell me like, doesn't work, then okay. Like we're not kind of living because in the past, if you had to go through the brain damage of all the upfront stuff, kind of like,
Correct.
well, we already did that. So like,
Correct. It's a sunk
I'm
cost.
going to
We have to
probably
use
keep
it.
using it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And you see
All right.
that with buyers as well. They're thinking about that.
That's a
Yeah.
very good point. All right. I want
Yeah.
to be cognizant of time. A few more questions for you. So this is more like on your CEO, hat. Obviously, maybe kind of give the audience a little bit of your background because I know your background really well, but I think one of the questions that we ask everyone is just how do you think about like one resource allocation in the business as CEO? And then I think two, in this world where like OpEx has drastically changed that you don't necessarily need the same sort of cost structure to build these companies.
Yeah.
Like I mean, obviously you're AI native business, but like at the same time, like how do you think about experimentation, testing with an AI? And then like on top of that, like resource planning within the rest of the organization that you have and like sharing all those experiments that is not silent. So kind of two questions. One, kind of walk through just resource allocation, probably from your background, and maybe kind of share a bit more of your
Yeah.
background before you were doing this. And then I'd love to hear more about how you experiment inside the business.
Yeah. Yeah. So briefly from a background perspective, people sometimes joke, I kind of went backwards on this thing. So, now I started Poggio, and prior to that was at Google Cloud for many years. And then before that worked in venture capital. And before that was actually an enterprise software focused investment banker. And it sort of sounds a little chaotic, but the thread was basically I love enterprise software. As a banker, I realized that I really love that. And if you really like the software and the technology, then rather than going kind of hedge fund or private equity, it's like let's go early stage. Went
Yeah.
there, kind of realized while I was there, like, oh, actually, I really like this kind of early stage pre revenue kind of idea phase stuff. Let me go do that. And so I spent some time doing that. And then if you're going to do that, it's like, well, now I want to go build this stuff and sell this stuff.
Yeah.
And so join Google Cloud. And then I guess the logical conclusion is like, oh, okay, got to go do this myself. So yeah, it's definitely sort of an interesting set of perspectives. I think I will say it's helpful in some ways. I think you also sometimes sit there just like you know too much. Sometimes you're just
Yeah.
like, I wish I didn't know any of this and I didn't have to overthink it. I think it's a resource allocation is like a really interesting question in this environment because things change so fast. And I think one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is, and also just sort of due to my kind of background in sort of infrastructure and stuff like that is sort of like abstraction layers and like where are the abstractions going to exist, both within our product and how we build our product and sort of deploy resources towards our product, both from a people perspective, but also, where do you kind of, where are you willing to have those or where do you want those abstractions? And then even just as a business, like where do the abstractions exist and where are you, especially in the early stages, like where are you okay with sort of things being very chaotic and where you kind of need
Yes.
things to be like pretty buttoned up and understanding that like sometimes chaotic things can get made a lot less chaotic with technology over time and you start to kind of a lot of this really starts to be around like developing an intuition around sort of how you think things might go like within a margin
Hmm.
of error. And so I find it really interesting because a lot of this game is testing things and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work and you do more of what works and you stop doing the things that don't work. I think the thing that obviously I don't have as much experience with running companies too much in this sort of pre LLM era from a founder perspective, but I think one of the things that is really interesting now is like the what's working and what's not working can change really fast. And so you could, I mean, the really obvious example of this is sort of some of like the early cost structures thing where it's like certain things were just
Yeah.
like not feasible to do. And, your business model would be terrible. And then all of a sudden, well, what if the cost comes down a hundredth
You're
of what
you're
it
referring to the
was?
cost of inference and tokens
Yeah.
precipitously
Just
going
like
down. Yeah.
purely just basic like inference stuff. And so you've kind of got some of those things. Whereas, you think about that in the past where like if your margins were upside down, like you're kind of your margins. I mean, Snowflake is an example where that, they kind of figured that out over time. But I think they had there were reasons to believe that that was true at the time. I think, you can say costs are coming down on inference, but, and they will come down, but it's not necessarily like going to solve all your problems like I think
Yeah.
everyone thinks. And so some of that is like where are you willing to tolerate some risk and where are the sort of like structural issues if it only comes down 50% in the next year.
Yeah.
So some of those things I think from a team perspective, I think making sure that people understand that like change is the constant as with startups in general, but like things are going to be changing and we need to be rethinking things that may seem like they're not things that are able to be rethought, which is weird. You really have to take steps back
It's an
from what you're
entirely new mental
doing.
model, right? It's like,
Yeah.
we were trained as kind of how software and products were getting sold in terms of go to market to now all of
Yeah.
a sudden the distribution mechanism and the way that things are getting bought, as we discussed in this conversation, can be completely inverted. And actually the
Yeah.
inversion is actually good. But like,
Yeah.
can you as the individual and the founder and the team and actually maybe the department, can you adapt to that? That's the big
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. And be like not just comfortable with it, but sort of like seek it out, which is always a work in progress. Like I think it's one of those things that it's easy to say, but you gotta like I feel like you almost have to like write it down on paper and like look in
Yeah.
the mirror once a week and just kind of like what am I not rethinking? And it is a really, really weird mental model. Like just it's really weird. And I think, we're still on the earlier stage side, but there's businesses especially some of like the early businesses in kind of the LLM 1.0 trend that, got to pretty massive scale and then the kind of like the bottom fell out. And
Just
that's,
disappeared. Yeah.
and I've heard some just kind of stories on some of the, pre AI businesses too, where like the entire value prop was just like, we're at like 50 million in ARR. And then it's like, it hasn't happened yet, but like we think that LLMs are going to commoditize like literally everything that we just did. And so I heard one story from an investor friend about a founder that sort of saw the writing on the wall there, and I think like literally sunset like a $40 million ARR business or something like that to like rebuild it with sort of paraphrasing. This was a while ago, and I feel like I kind of blanked it out a little bit because it sounded
Yeah.
I was like secondhand traumatized, but I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
imagine like
Yeah.
what that must be like, and I think
I mean, that's a good
yeah,
framing though on the change, right? The change is constant, right? I think startup founders, kind of by definition, you have to be willing to accept that kind of level of kind of
yeah,
chaos, that internal chaos, and
yeah,
kind of balance it. And I think
yeah.
The interesting thing is, at least on the enterprise buyer front, there's some companies, could be in logistics or transportation, that are very forward thinking when they think about adaptation, evolution in terms of
Hmm.
products. There's others that are kind of built in their ways. I think what you shared today, particularly through the story of the business, and I think your background, and also more how you just kind of see products and services getting bought within the
Yeah.
enterprise, like it should give everyone a lot of excitement because the chaos and the change is really good. And also at the same time, what I heard and learned today is that it's a really easy way to try the product.
Hmm.
We're living in a world where you don't have these massive upfront commitments and these
Yeah.
consultations that you need. Like you can go live with what you're doing very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's very atypical in enterprise software.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, by the way, I want to end with that, Matt, because like this is awesome. So thank you for taking the time on a Friday of what was going on. Final question that I ask everyone is: if someone wants to get in touch with you and learn more about the product, learn more about the business, what's the best contact details?
Yeah. Probably Matt at Poggio.io. You can also obviously find me on LinkedIn or tweet at me. I usually pretty good at replying there.
Yes, very good. All right, Matt. Thanks for coming on.
Great. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.